think most people don't understand what emotions are. And, they kind of abbreviate, or, they basically distinguish emotions in terms of good and bad. Whereas there is no such thing as bad emotions. They're all okay emotions. There's no such thing as good and bad. For example, crying, it's okay to cry, you know.
Welcome to Podcast for School Kids. So, the way I usually start this podcast is by asking people how they're doing. So, my first question, it'll be as open-ended as it can be. What's up? How's life? How have you been doing? Especially, I think, over the last few days, and months actually, we've had these unprecedented situations. So, what's on your mind? How's life been?
This is from me directly. Well, I think it's one of the best things that has ever happened to me. I think COVID-19 is a blessing in disguise. I'm a staunch learner, so I love learning. I want to study. I want to get more knowledge. And with this COVID-19, since the travel ban, I got all my certification programs online. So I was studying in US at the same time. I was studying in Australia. I was studying like everywhere, and I think that was a really great. It basically also gave us a confidence to figure out technology to its fullest potential, and to basically reach more individuals. I mean, how much could you do just sitting back in your country, in your own city, and by going around physically one-to-one individual. I think this basically jacked up the speed. We now have 100 participants, 200 participants. It's just much more better connecting. I mean, we wouldn't have been able to do the MCW global workshop, conference if it was not online, right?
Yeah, right.
Sure.
So yeah, that's a great perspective to look at things. And while most people sort of saw it as it changed their plans, you looked at it as a venue of possibilities. So that's a great way of looking at it. What role do you think mental health plays in the things that we encounter, in the circumstances that we are in? How much of a role, especially growing up, does our neurology and our mental health play?
Wow. This is I think I get this question asked around most of the times, and I can't emphasize enough that it is the whole support system. It's the entire infrastructure. It's like, for example, I was watching this documentary, and you'll be really fascinated to know that as a child, when we're inside our mother's womb, it's like coded information. So when our brain is developing, every single atom inside knows exactly which position to take, and they're like automatically driven. So the hardware develops yet, but the software is completely our personal responsibility, 100%. We do bodybuilding. We bring muscles to our six-pack abs. I think we should develop those one-pack ab right over here. This is the lifeline. I mean, anything we have. So I was looking at the statistics of adverse childhood experience in the world, and everybody scored at least a bare minimum 1 on it. So everybody had post-traumatic stress, if not traumatic stress disorder. And that was majorly, because of the environment, the, college, the upbringing, because our values, whatever we value the most, comes from where? I mean, from the schools that we studied from, the type of childhood that we had, the parents' role. Every person that talked to us consciously or unconsciously, even in religious scriptures, you might be knowing this. So, for example, our Hindu brothers or Muslim brothers, when the child is born, they recite something. Yeah. Now, why do you recite? You recite because it ingrains into the neurology from that very childhood moment. So the brain is processed to absorb a lot of information from its surrounding. I hope that really answers the question. So I've been intrigued. The brain is one of the muscles that we really, really have to consider. We really want to train it. We really got to talk about it, because it has a this is also interesting. It has a self-defense mechanism. You see, every time I personally, because I've done a lot of therapies for myself, now my auto, defense system says, Arslan, you don't need therapy. Now my ego kicks in. Now now I think that I'm all-knowing, and that's not true. Every time even you thinking that you're all-knowing is a problem, and that can be worked on, right? So because we want to be, learners till the day we are basically, gone or we have left this life. So we want to keep learning. I think that's how I would want to answer it. Yeah.
Right. It's great that you mentioned, that the brain kind of takes in everything that's happening around us. So, as kids, when we're entering into adolescence and then we're entering into adulthood, we're usually fed with a lot of conventional ideas of everything, not just of success or failure, everything. So, in such instances, how do we form independent views and not let say our brains be affected by all the different kinds of noises that we listen to? And as often, like you said, so that we all have traumas, and we all have different experiences that we grow up with. In such cases, how do we form an independent mind and at the same time be aware of what's happening around us? Does that make sense?
That's a difficult question to answer. I mean, what you're actually talking about is awareness, right? And there's a thing with awareness. So I don't know, this is not a research though, but I'm just sharing it for the heck of fun only. I've come to a conclusion that the smartest species in the world, if you see their children, they're kind of like the dumbest when they're born. And the species that are basically the dumbest, and if you see their children, I mean, like, for example, let's take a example. Like, for example, dog gives birth to a pup, and the pup basically knows how to walk the second day.
Right.
Whereas a human being gives birth to a child, and that child cannot walk for like about 2 years. So
Yeah.
so that, I think that's a huge difference between social animals and animals itself, is that we tend to take time, and we take sufficient amount of time. So even like when my baby was born, I saw that cognitively they know exactly what to do. That's like their ROM is working. So they know that if I need to breastfeed, I know exactly where to do the suckling. I know when I'm supposed to be hungry. I know when I'm supposed to cry. So the baby knows its basic routines and functions. You don't have to teach them how to breathe or do anything else. Yet they pick up learning language and walking and other skill sets very slowly. And so if I really I say take time. You see, this is an indication of reflection. So the child technically for the first 1 year is only reflecting. It's like a dumb being of nature with a zero software, and is looking at like, what is mom doing, what is dad doing, and is observing, right? And seriously, I mean, like we mostly don't observe. Do you understand that? We always jump our guns and we point out, oh, you're like this, oh, you're like that. We don't take time to observe. And when I say observation, it's not external observation, but it's also internal. We want to be observant about ourselves as well, right? Which we are, only in sense of fashion. So like, mere baal theek lag rahe, or something like that. Am I wearing my glasses properly? So we want to be a little bit more aware of I think awareness is the single most thing that makes it. And if you see all the poets, all the philosophers, they keep on talking about all that you need, the wisdom of the world is inside you. Reflect inside you. So it kind of now makes sense. They reflected and they observed that all that information was. So I say observation, patience, resilience, but above all, and then the second thing that I would really want is maybe ask a good question. Our quality of questions are not good. Because like God, why Allah kyun aisa hota hai, Bhagwan mere saath ye aisa kyun kiya? I mean, if you're going to ask these questions, I think somebody's going to look up and look down because you deserved it. There is no answer for such questions. So you got to ask, so you got to ask, I know this has happened for me and I think you want me to learn. So what is it that you're wanting me to learn? Now that's a good question. And that would, pace you. So I think listening, observing and questioning, I think I could cap those as, very basic things for us to get out of, to maybe understand the perspective better. Let's just put it this way. Understanding the perspective better. Yeah.
Right. So, now you mentioned all of that you mentioned. I think one important question I have is that I think there are just bizarre views out there about happiness. So what do we mean by happiness? Some people say that it's just a flawed concept and chasing happiness is futile. Whereas some people say that no, you have to decisively choose to be happy. So how do you view happiness, and how do you think, in life, where does happiness plot on a map?
That's a mathematical equation question. So I think I might want to write that down also with me so that I can explain it a little bit better.
Yeah.
So let's say if they, so the model that I realized it was X, which is for the things that happen,
Yeah.
meaning, and if we have meaning, we get emotion. If we get emotion, we get feeling. If we get feeling, then we basically have fear. Yeah, let me put this in that perspective.
Right.
Anything that happens in life, let's say if you want to deduce that by X, anything that happens. For example, you're here, I'm here, we're doing this podcast. This is something that is happening, right? Now, the moment at any given instance, I give it a meaning, right? Because the brain is automatically functioned to that. No matter what happens, I have to associate a meaning to it. So now the meaning that I'm associating to maybe this podcast is we're going to be, inspiring a lot of other individuals who will listen to this podcast, right? So
Yeah.
once I give it this meaning, it produces a certain amount of emotion. And the emotion could be, for me, it could be recognition. For me, it could be, serving other people. And that makes me happy. So let's give the emotion now a name. So it makes me feel, so when I say I'm happy, it's also a feeling that I've created for myself. And that leads to a behavior. So the behavior would be, I want to do this again and again and again. So the most important component is the meanings that we give to our, things. I think that's the easiest way to define it. So let's say anything happens to your life. Now, no matter what meaning you're going to give to it, it will create an emotion. It will create a feeling. And yes, when people say okay, happiness is your own thing, what they're actually indicating is that you have to assign a positive meaning to it, right? So, for example, I watched this video. It still moves me today. It's called 99 Balloons. 99 Balloons was about a couple who had a child, and the child was diagnosed with trisomy 18, and the child the doctor said the child would not even survive a month. Now the family saw that. Now that's a situation, and that's an X that is happening. But the family decided to give it a meaning. Now, I'm not saying that they chose happiness for themselves, but they gave it a meaning. And the meaning was that they celebrated the child's birthday every single day. So, whereas we celebrated once in a year, they would celebrate it every single day. And they did that for 99 days, you know. And after 99 days, when the child passed away, they had lived an eternity of 99. Most
Right.
of I won't live up to my 99th birthday, maybe, but that child went through 99 birthdays. So the family felt complete, and they had that, and they basically looked up to God as not, something that was taken away from them, but also the pleasure that God gave them for that particular 99 days. Because what if they didn't have that? Their parents who can never even have child. So it's the meanings that we associate. Whatever you're going to associate the meaning is bound to create certain thing. Now, whether happiness or sadness would depend on mostly the meaning. I
Right.
hope that is answered.
What is NLP and how relevant it is today? And because I'm sure that it's not still as big in most parts of the world. It is really big, but not as big. So, what is NLP and how relevant it is today?
Yeah. So NLP is relatively new. So and it is a new thing that is emerging. I was checking up in Pakistan. I'm amongst the two trainers that are there, teaching NLP. In India, there are about maybe 3 to 4. In the entire, we're big countries, okay? I mean,
Yeah.
we could utilize, but there are so many less people who are, in NLP. But there's something that was before NLP, and that is very famous. It's called hypnosis or hypnotherapy. Everybody knows hypnosis, so as soon as you say hypnosis, they get, something that you mystically do. So NLP was like an offshoot, so from NLP, hypnosis, psychology, and other practices. NLP was a study of what successful people do, and the people who were studying these patterns were mind experts, were people who were expert psychologists, who were expert, psychiatrists. They contributed a lot of information which helped to the development of a procedure. What do successful people do? And if we know what successful people do, we could take that information, install it in our brain, and it starts functioning and producing the same results. And most people think, but as so I get these questions in Urdu, language that I don't know if it's very similar to Hindi. It's like ऐसा होता नहीं है, सब कुछ आपके दिमाग में होता है. When people say it's all in your
Right.
head,
Yeah, it's all in your head. Yeah.
and I look up to them and I say, yes, it is in our head, and you want to be right with it, right? So because when you tell people wake up early in the morning, successful people tend to wake up at like 5 a.m. They start their days early, not 5 maybe, but 7, 6, or 5, whatever. But if you wake up early, that's what successful people do. And then they go like, yeah, but why should I do that every day? Do you see how easy it is? Although it's just in the head, yet they don't follow instructions. So we want to create cognition, processes where their acceptability of success patterns is much more faster. And, and how do we make that happen is that we want to basically take out their, bad habits. Maybe bad habits are stopping them. Maybe their bad behavior is stopping them. Maybe there are certain things that they have actualized which are not allowing them, which we call negative or limiting belief, that is stopping them from going to that. So that's how we do it. So we don't call ourselves actually therapists, but we are modeling experts. We understand the science and art of how to take successful behaviors and how to basically manage their previous choices, and we want to basically create something really alternate new. We're not changing somebody's personality, but we're seeing that they could do more with the resources that they have. So that's called neuro-linguistic programming, NLP. Neuro is the brain.
Yeah.
Linguistic, I've already explained the meanings that we give to things.
Right.
So if we understand the brain and the meanings that we give to things, we can actually program it like a computer. It is very much programmable. That's how it is.
Yeah. Wow, that sounds interesting. So, you mentioned something about limiting belief. What do you think is what is a limiting belief, and how does it affect us?
Generalized statements that we figure out to be true for ourselves for some 2 or 3 situations that we've encountered. For example, I cannot be successful. Like right now I'm not in the right age to start my business. Most people have that type of most people have a limiting belief that now I'm too old to start something,
Right.
Or, like, for example, women can't drive is a limiting belief. Okay.
Yeah.
Because just because they saw one female, not driving accurately, well, there are more accidents that men make than female because there are not even those many female drivers. So anything that limits us, something that we, hold as a, justification to why we're not there is pretext as, limiting belief. And that's basically a decision that we took in time to basically avoid things. And that's how limiting beliefs are. Mostly dangerous.
Right. So, and I particularly remembered you stated this while I was listening to you back then, is that poor people are poor because they have a neurology of being poor. Right. And you mentioned about taking patterns from successful people. So how do we cultivate that kind of neurology where we it's a state of self-actualization, if I may say. So how do we cultivate that neurology? How do we cultivate those patterns? And how do we learn those patterns and feed into our mental system?
Wow. I usually take about 300 hours in explaining that, but I'll try to make it. It's a whole cycle. I don't know how to, explain that in the fastest possible way. So what I would say is that, in order to maximize everything that you can potentially do is then, you should know about the 4 obstacles. Let's talk about the obstacles, what would really come in between. Anybody who's not successful would have 4 things that stop them from being successful. So number 1 would be negative thinking. Now, for some people, they might be awesome. Have you ever seen successful people who are good? They're great with everything, but they just only engage in negative thinking. They all the time, think about, if I go out on Friday, pata nahi kya ho jayega, like, if the black cat, crosses my road, I don't know what will happen. So they might be just only engaged in negative thinking, but they might be otherwise all okay. So that's one, factor that stops us. That's factor 1. Factor number 2 would be, again, negative emotions. Now, I think most people don't understand what emotions are. And, they've kind of abbreviate, or they basically distinguish emotions in terms of good and bad, whereas there is no such thing as bad emotions. They're all okay emotions. There's no such thing as good and bad. For example, crying, it's okay to cry, you know and mostly, people are trained that, agar aap mard ho to, if you're a guy,
Yeah.
if you're a
You
man,
got it.
you're supposed to cry, which is not right. I mean, like, crying is a natural human body function. It's something that has been gifted to us. That's what we naturally do. So there's no such thing as good and bad. So to understand emotions, we got to understand how to acknowledge the emotions that we're going through and being more aware of them. And yes, we want to get rid of negative emotions. Negative emotions are a little bit different. Negative emotion is that, although, some people do cry, but then some people make the crying as their habit and pattern. So they're crying and they're damaging themselves in terms of their personal life. That's dangerous. That's negative emotion. So that would be like depression causes sadness. That could be like, for example, anger that could drive you to do something really negative. Although anger is good also. Maybe like, for example, what if I saw in Pakistan and India, and I saw, the people on the street, children were begging money. If I get angry and start an initiative of opening a school, that's a good anger, right?
Right.
So we got to basically understand emotions. So we just want to get rid of negative emotions. So we want to get rid of negative thinking. We want to get rid of negative emotions. That's the second component. The third one would be inner conflict. Inner conflict is also major. So most people think that it's only thinking and emotions, but yeah, and on the realistic side, there are situations in life where you're like, you're being pushed, from both hands. Should I shift to USA or should I be back in India? If I go to USA, I'm going to earn a lot, but I'm going to miss my family. Should I be with my family? But then I can't earn more. So inner conflict is something that rips you apart in two different directions. And when you're ripped apart, that's also a situation where your dichotomy goes towards two different sides. So we want to basically be aware of those inner conflicts, and we want to get rid of those and create more alignment. So I would use the word alignment in between. So negative thinking, negative emotion, inner conflict, and the last one, which we already discussed, which was limiting belief. So we want to get rid of limiting beliefs in order to creating new empowering beliefs, from people saying that I can't do this or I can do this, right? So we want them to create possibilities of, a good belief system that helps them to feel more empowered. So I think these are the four things, but for me to explain how this four therapeutically work, I think that's going to take me about days together. But I think for surface level information, this should be helpful for many other
Yeah.
people.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this kind of gives it that early stage conversation into understanding how things work. So at this moment, I think I have to ask you that how do we assess our mental health, and how do we assess where are we standing as individuals, and then how do we decipher that it's the right time to seek help, or it's the right time to maybe reach out to a mentor or just someone we can seek help from. So how do we assess that? Because it's difficult. Even I personally speaking, I don't know when I need help. I'm just
Yeah.
constantly doubting, and as you said, maybe sometimes the ego comes in between us. So
Yeah.
how do we assess our mental health? How do we decide that it's the right time to reach out to someone?
Should I give a metaphor for this?
Yeah,
Put
sure,
it in a
sure.
story?
Right.
Okay,
Anything.
so you see, we drink water every single day, right?
Yeah.
Now, let's assume if you became thirsty. And by thirsty, I mean is that you're feeling really thirsty, you're dry from your throat. That means your body's almost dehydrated. So, the doctors recommend that you got to have water after every constantly some, time. You can have 3 sips, after have some consistent amount of water. So 3 liters of water is a really good intake. But, some people don't drink that much water. Some people take too much excessive water. But then some people feel thirsty when not much water is going in. So that's an indication that you need to get water. Your body's going to give you some signals. So the body is designed to give us some signals, right? So there are people who feel, when they say, my मेरे घर वाले मुझे समझते नहीं, my home people are not understanding me, my office people don't understand me, my friends don't understand me. Hold on for a moment, this thing, maybe your body is saying something to you, right? Maybe it's saying that you're not getting along with people really, really well. So your body's going to give you indications. I had somebody who, said that, I was feeling, suicidal. And I said, well, that, you feeling suicidal is your body giving you indication, just like, when you feel thirsty, you feel dehydrated, right? And every time your body gives you that signal, I think it's really good to either, adapt. If not, if you don't really feel that, you should go to a therapist, at least start with some self-help, right? Some self-help is better than not, helping yourself at all. And by self-help, I mean is like joining the gym, going for meditation, going for a tour, or maybe, talking to somebody that you really admire or as a loved one. But this is your body giving you signals. But then there comes a threshold level, and threshold level is depression, and that's when
Right.
shit hits the roof, and you're crying, you're panicking, you're sweating, your body's now showing physiological symptologies, and you end up with certain diseases which are also rooted from actually neurological points, and that's a huge thing. For some surveys, cancer was mostly because of inner conflict. Heart attack was mostly because of negative emotion of anger. So there are a lot of diseases that are, improved with mental health. So I think you got to be asking your body, I think we shouldn't shut ourselves with distractions, right? We mostly, distract
Yeah.
ourselves. Let's put it this way, you
Right.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah. So my dad shouted on me, so I'm gonna have one kg ice cream. It's not gonna help. Those are distractors, right? Just because I got fired from my job, so now I'm gonna basically go with my friends and drink alcohol. These are distractors. They're dangerous stuff. So I think paying attention would still be the single most important component. We really don't know. I mean, I don't really now know when I need a therapist, but my therapist, somehow gave me the indication, Arslan, you're good enough. You have your sense of awareness. And I said, sure. And, is it okay if I come to you once in 6 months? Just to be sure
Yeah.
that if I'm, following the strategies really appropriately. So that's how I do it. But first it was like, once every week. There were times when it was once every day. So, you expand and you basically make more muscle for yourself.